hats, or that our ladies are not silly enough to have Chinese feet, though they are silly enough to have high-heeled shoes. Nor should we necessarily have come an inch nearer to the Chinese extravagances, even if the chimney-pot hat rose higher than a factory chimney, or the high heels had evolved into a sort of stilts. By the same fallacy the Englishman will not only curse the French peasant as a miser, but will also try to tip him as a beggar. That is, he will first complain of the man having the surliness of an independent man, and then accuse him of having the servility of a dependent one. Just as the hypothetical Chinaman cannot believe that we have top hats but not pigtails, so the Englishman cannot believe that peasants are not snobs even when they are savages. Or he sees that a Paris paper is violent and sensational, and then supposes that some millionaire owns 20 such papers and runs them as a newspaper trust. Surely the yellow press is present everywhere to paint the map yellow, as the British Empire is to paint it red. It never occurs to such critic that the French paper is violent because it is personal, and personal because it belongs to a real and responsible person, and not to a ring of nameless millionaires. It is a pamphlet and not an anonymous pamphlet. In 100 other cases the same truth could be illustrated. The situation in which the black man first assumes that all mankind is black, and then accuses the rest of the artificial vice of painting their faces red and yellow, or the hypocrisy of whitewashing themselves after the fashion of whited sepulchres. The particular case of it now before us is that of the English misunderstanding of America, and it is based, as in all these cases, on the English misunderstanding of England. For the truth is that England has suffered of late from not having enough of the free shooting of Hannibal Chollop, from not understanding enough that the libation of freedom must sometimes be quaffed in blood. The prosperous Englishman will not admit this, but then the prosperous Englishman will not admit that he has suffered from anything. That is what he is suffering from. Until lately, at least, he refused to realize that many of his modern habits had been bad habits, the worst of them being contentment. For all the real virtue in contentment evaporates when the contentment is only satisfaction, and the satisfaction is only self-satisfaction. Now it is perfectly true that America, not England, has seen the most obvious and outrageous official denials of liberty. But it is equally true that it has seen the most obvious flouting of such official nonsense, far more obvious than any similar evasions in England. And nobody who knows the subconscious violence of the American character would ever be surprised if the weapons of Chollop began to be used in that most lawful lawlessness. It is perfectly true that the libation of freedom must sometimes be drunk in blood, and never more, one would think, than when mad millionaires forbid it to be drunk in beer. But America, as compared with England, is the country where one can still fancy men obtaining the libation of beer by the libation of blood. Vulgar plutocracy is almost omnipotent in both countries, but I think there is now more kick of reaction against it in America than in England. The Americans may go mad when they make laws, but they recover their reason when they disobey them. I wish I could believe that there was as much of that destructive repentance in England, as indeed there certainly was when Cobbett wrote. It faded gradually like a dying fire through the Victorian era, and was one of the very few realities that Dickens did not understand. But anyone who does understand it will know that the day of Cobbett saw the last lost fight for English democracy, and that if he had stood at that turning of the historic road, he would have wished a far better fate to the frame breakers and the Fury against the first machinery, and luck to the Luddite fires. Anyhow, what is wanted is a new Martin Chuzzlewit, told by a wiser Mark Tapley. It is typical of something sombre and occasionally stale in the mood of Dickens when he wrote that book that the same comic servant is not really very comic. Mark Tapley is a very thin shadow of Sam Weller, but if Dickens had written it in a happier mood, there might have been a truer meaning in Mark Tapley's happiness. For it is true that this illogical good humour amid unreason and disorder is one of the real virtues of the English people. It is the real advantage they have in that adventure all over the world, which they were recently and reluctantly induced to call an empire. That receptive ridicule remains with them as a secret pleasure when they are colonists or convicts. Dickens might have written another version of the great romance, and one in which America was really seen gaily by Mark instead of gloomily by Martin. If Mark Tapley might really have made the best of America, then America would have lived and danced before us like Pickwick's England, a fairyland of happy lunatics and lovable monsters; and we might still have sympathised as much with the rhetoric of Lafayette Kettle as with the rhetoric of Wilkins Micawber, or with the violence of Chollop as with the violence of Boythorn. That new Martin Chuzzlewit will never be written, and the loss of it is more tragic than the loss of Edwin Drood. But every man who has travelled in America has seen glimpses and episodes in that untold tale; and far away on the Red Indian frontiers, or in the hamlets in the hills of Pennsylvania, there are people whom I met for a few hours, for a few moments, whom I none the less sincerely like and respect, because I cannot but smile as I think of them. But the converse is also true. They have probably forgotten me, but if they remember, they laugh. The end of section 29. The end of chapter 16.